Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you some reflections on the Gospel for this 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Every now and then in the Gospels, Jesus will say something that just makes me want to throw my hands up in the air and say, "Really? Really?" And today's Gospel is a perfect example of that. Jesus is on the road toward Jerusalem with his apostles, and he's heard word already that Herod wants to kill him. And he knows that in Jerusalem, waiting for him are the Sadducees, who want to arrest him, throw him in jail, and hopefully crucify him. And why not crucify the apostles right along with him? So this is the hornet's nest that's awaiting him in Jerusalem that they are heading toward. And what does he say to his apostles? He says, "Do not live in fear, little flock. Do not be afraid." Really? Are you kidding? They got every reason to be afraid. And Jesus says the same thing to us here in our lifetime. Do not be afraid, little flock. And I want to say to him, are you kidding me? Because there's lots in this life to be afraid of. And fear strikes me as being a pretty reasonable reaction. The friend of a friend of mine died of cancer, and just a terrible cancer, and leaving behind her family, her children, and it was so painful. To be afraid of that? Yeah, you bet. You bet you can be afraid of cancer. And with what's going on right now in our country, I have some friends who have lived here for 25, 30 years. They're undocumented, but they have a house, they're married, the kids in school, and so forth, and they're living terribly concerned about getting picked up by ICE and being deported and having their life turned upside down. And could you imagine me saying to them, "Do not be afraid, little flock"? I mean, really? They are afraid. And I think they have every reason in the world to be afraid. And not just here, but look at the mess in the Middle East and that war that's pulling others into it. Or the war right now in Ukraine that's endless, that's also pulling other countries into it. You bet fear sounds like a pretty normal way to respond. And I had this one dad tell me that with all of the things going on in the world, just weather-wise, and all the floods and the natural disasters we're having, and on top of that, what technology and how it's changing us so radically, he was saying that he was scared not for himself, but for his children and his grandchildren, about how this world is going to be for them. Yeah, fear strikes me as being a pretty good response, a pretty normal response. So when Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, little flock," what is he just offering us pleasantries? And then he continues after that by saying, "Do not be afraid because the Father, it has pleased him to give you the kingdom." And that doesn't mean, when you die, you get to go to heaven. No. Jesus is saying he's going to give you the kingdom now. And that's why you don't need to be afraid or live in fear. And what does giving you the kingdom now mean? Well, I think it means this. What Jesus was offering his people was courage. He was trying to offer them courage in the face of fear. He didn't say to them, "I'm going to make those fearful things go away," and they certainly didn't. The Sadducees were waiting for him, and Herod did want to kill him, and he was crucified. But by saying the Father pleases him to give you the kingdom, those words were meant to encourage the disciples. And those words of courage would help them face that of which they are afraid. And so too with us. Those words, as I said, don't make the fearful thing disappear, but the courage can be able to help us face them. And where does that courage come from? Well, sometimes it comes from the grace of God inside every one of us. I think of those times where all of us are challenged in a moment to do the right thing or to say the right thing, even though doing so or saying so will perhaps draw upon us the anger of other people or their rejection of us. But at least then we can be able to go home and look in the mirror and say to ourselves, regardless of how everybody reacted, I know I did the right thing. I know I said the right thing. And that kind of feeling it's grace. Because I especially know for myself those times where I didn't say what should have been said or do what should have been done. And I would go home and I'd be kind of ashamed. And I'd look in the mirror and not like what was looking back at me. Jesus wanted to be able to give words of encouragement, or in other words, give to every soul that grace that helps them to be courageous and do the right thing. But not just that. It's also the courage comes to us from those around us. People who are working with us, for us. People who forgive us, have mercy on us, show us understanding. All of that gives us courage when we're facing our fears. I think the clearest example I can think of, and I apologize to you because I've told you this story before, and I tell it to you again because it's the best one that I know of. So forgive me if you've heard this before, but the clearest example I can think of in my own life is when I had my heart bypass. And back in December of 2019, where I went into the hospital of what was supposed to be a very simple procedure of getting a stent, but which rapidly turned into the doctor telling me, you're going to need a quadruple bypass, and you're going to need it right now. And hearing the doctor say we needed it right now, that made me sit up in the chair. And when he drew out everything that was going to be necessary in order to be able to do the surgery and what was going to happen, was I afraid? Yeah, you bet I was afraid. And unfortunately, there was a bit of a mix-up in the surgery room, and so they couldn't do it the next day. So I had a day just to sit and think about it, and think about how they're going to take a saw and literally cut right up my chest and pry me apart and stop my heart and take arteries from other parts of my body and put those in the place of it. And then hopefully my heart would start back up again. And there's a possibility of a stroke during all of this. And was I scared? Yeah, you bet I was scared. And I went to sleep that night. And I had a dream. I think God gave me a dream where I was walking into the church visitation along with this other man whom I didn't know. And scores of people were just pouring into the church. And as we walked in, I saw the church was just filled with people like it is on Christmas or Easter. And I said to the guy with me, I said, what's going on? And he said, we're all here to pray. And I asked the fellow, what are we praying for? And he looked at me and he said, well, we're here to pray for you. And I just woke up and I was so at peace. That dream didn't make all my fears go away. And it didn't try to convince me that everything's going to be fine. The surgery is going to be fine. Don't worry at all. And in fact, it wasn't fine. The quadruple bypass, unfortunately, within a few months failed. And I did have a stroke. And so those fears still were there. But what it did give me was tremendous assurance, the courage that so many people were praying for me and walking with me. And I could then face my fears, knowing that I had this wonderful church filled with people with me. And don't we say that in church all the time? We say to somebody, say a prayer for me, or please pray for this intention of mine. And when we're at Mass, don't we have the prayer of the faithful where we're praying for all the needs of the world? And why are we doing that? If not, to be able to reassure others and to give them the strength that comes from the courage that comes from knowing that they are not alone in the moment. Jesus ends the gospel by talking about the faithful servant who knows his master's business so well and takes care of all of those things that need being cared for, awaiting the master's return. And that's you and me. We are called upon to be those faithful servants who know the master's desires so well that we are busy about doing that which he wants to have done in this world. That is to say, bringing the kingdom to all others. And so today, let's ask ourselves, who do I know in my life that could really use some encouragement? Who do I know that really could use a shoulder to lean on or cry on? Who do I know that really needs a prayer? And today, we become that faithful servant who does what Jesus did, who gives courage to his people so that they do not need to live in fear. That is what the kingdom of God is all about and what it looks like. A church filled with people, all of them praying for each other, walking with each other, supporting each other, so that none need live in fear.